Hello everybody, and welcome back to Creation Myths. What I'm going to show you here is a really fun, really interesting conversation I had on the Apologetics live YouTube show on Thursday, October 6th, 2022. Apologetics Live is hosted by Andrew Rappaport, and this is a call-in show where viewers can join the stream and chat with the guests and the hosts. It airs live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. The link to the complete show on which I appeared is down below if you want to watch the whole complete show, my part, and the rest of it. And you could subscribe to that channel to catch that show live. Again, that's every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. The topic of the conversation I'm going to show you is not something I normally talk about on this channel because it's not directly related to evolution and creationism, but it came up, as I'll talk about, so I ended up having this long conversation about it. And the topic was sex determination in humans and whether sex is binary or not. Spoiler, it's not. Biology is rarely so neat. But I need to provide a bit of a backstory to explain how this conversation ended up happening. This is the same show, Apologetics Live, on which I had a conversation with Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson a few months earlier when he was their guest. At the end of that show, they brought me back on camera briefly to ask, what is a woman? For a biologist, that's a question that takes some time to answer, and that's basically what I said. Here, take a look at that moment.
I did say that, we'd let you go. I know Dr. Dan is still in the background. I'm wondering if Dr. Dan, if you're still there and put your camera back on, that way I would know. And I want to bring you back in. I want to ask you one burning question. Not one, but you're a biologist. I have two biologists here. I have a burning question that has been asked recently. I'm wondering if you can help out with. I know that it can't be answered by Supreme Court justices. What is a woman?
Oh, you do not want me to go down this road because sex determination and development. I mean, Dr. Jeanson is probably more familiar with developmental biology than I am, but that's a really complicated question, especially when you consider the complexities of human biology. We can go down that road, but I mean, it's already almost 11:15. How much time we got?
So we may have to have you come back just for that then.
I actually do. I talk in class about sex determination, chromosomal determinants, hormonal determinants, genetic determinants.
What determines sex?
See, there is no answer to that question that I could answer in the time that we have tonight.
Really? Okay.
It is a really complicated question. It is a really complicated question.
So it's not a question of chromosome X versus Y.
100% no. It's 100%
not. No. Okay. So here'd be a question. Is it the bone structure?
It's multifactorial. There's lots of components to it.
When we go back and we look at, say, Lucy, we can't really know if that's really a girl, right?
We can developmentally be reasonably certain based on the proportions of certain bones, specifically like hips, pelvis, that kind of thing. We can be reasonably certain about it in some cases, but not in others. It's not a 100% thing.
Okay.
Yeah. You can ask me the question 12 different ways if you want, but you're going to get the same answer each time.
Yeah. I might want to have you come back just for that because I don't think it's all that complex. I would answer it very simply. A woman is what God, who created the women, defines it as. God created her. He gets to give the definition. So it's a woman is what God calls a woman. But we may have to have you back on for that. That could be fun.
By the way, I don't know if you saw my message in the private chat on StreamYard, but I didn't see where you put your email. So if you don't mind just putting it in there, and I'll
put it in there.
Oh, great! Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I did a while ago. But hey, I do want to respect you or say that I thank you for coming. The conversation you two had was very cordial. I always get nervous because when people come in, we never know. So you are welcome back to come in, and it might be fun to have that discussion.
It's definitely a fun conversation. It's one of my favorite classes that I teach every year when we talk about development and sex determination. It is a really fun topic.
Yeah, I'm going to say that this is an example where sometimes we see people that interpret the Bible using culture to define that. What I'm going to argue, we're seeing science be interpreted by culture, that culture is interpreting science. And we use culture to define because I think that's where this came from. This was something that never occurred, this difficult definition, until 10 years ago.
It was a mental disorder 15 to 20 years ago. Let's be honest.
I will say this on that topic, that this is not a new thing. It's just now we're acknowledging it thing. But this has always been, I mean, there was a Roman emperor that was, if they were alive today, they would probably be transgender. Like that was the thing. So like, this is not a new thing for humanity. It's just we're kind of addressing it like more mainstream now.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
What followed was several months of them saying I couldn't answer that question and request to come back on to answer it. So I did. Here's that longer conversation in its entirety. I hope everyone finds this informative and entertaining.
Well, I appreciate you coming in. Now it is kind of funny. You said you just got home early, but you've been commenting for hours now.
I work until about like 9, and then so your show's at 8. I work until 9, and then it takes a while to get home. So I've been here for probably an hour and a half at this point. So yeah. So are we gonna talk about sex now?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And I would like. I mean, I do want to try to have a time where we can have more time, because I know we're already.
Yeah. So I mean, it's already late,
but and I've been asking you to come in, and I've been kind of giving you a hard time about not coming in. Gave you a hard time on Twitter about not coming in, and it would be an interesting discussion to sometimes also talk about BLM compared to January 6th. I'd love to have that discussion.
That's not my field. I'm not interested. But anything biology, I can fake it approximately. Anything outside of biology, probably not.
Well, I'm glad you admit that you're faking it.
Yeah, everybody's faking it.
All right. So here would be the first question that I would have for you then.
Yeah.
You're making a distinction, as I understand it, between sex and gender.
I think so. You're gonna hate the way that I want to kind of go through this, but we need to step back a little bit and do what I didn't do earlier and define our terms. We need to be
that's
hyper specific here, right?
That's why I wanted to. That's what I was trying to get to in defining those differences, because I think you make a distinction.
Yeah, so let's start with sex in just fundamental, like extremely reductionist technical sense. Like, what defines if I give you 2 cells, right? Like, how do you tell if what their sexes are, if they're male and female, like in a biological sense? How do we do that? Like, I'm actually asking, like, if someone asked you that question, what would you say?
As far as how I would define sex?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be people. It's just like in the most like kind of basic, all-encompassing biological sense.
Well, seeing that animals don't have issues with knowing if they're male or female, we're going to talk about it in the context of just people. And
I hear you, but in order for that to make sense, there's a bunch of terms that we have to establish. So like if you go simplest possible biological definition is what gametes you make, right? That's the like simplest thing. It's differentiated gametes. So,
and what is a gamete?
So a gamete is so egg and sperm, right? So do you make the big non-motile gamete, or do you make the small motile gamete, right? That's the defining question for, like, if I gave you 2 different cells of like green algae and said like, okay, one of these is male and one of these is female, how do you know which is which? And what you would do is you would see what gametes they make. That's how you would answer that, right?
Yeah, but we're talking about people. We're gonna stick with people here, and yeah, it's the gametes that they produce is always going to be associated with the XX or XY chromosomes. So
no,
well,
no, it's way more. Oh, it's so much more fun than that.
Tell me how a female produces sperm then, an X.
Okay, so we got to work our way there, because again, we can't just jump right into the deep end, right? We can't, like earlier when I was using terms like natural selection and genetic drift without defining them. We have to build up our kind of foundation here.
Let me also just preface it with this: is not everyone in the audience has a degree in biology. I mean, I know you and Anthony both have more that, my field is more in the engineering. So, I didn't, I had college biology. But right. So defining terms would be really good, and keeping it where we're not, where everyone can follow along. I think that was with you and Nathaniel. The problem was that it went over everyone's head.
Yeah. So that is, and that's exactly why I want to start with this extremely reductionist definition of just the simplest thing. You could apply it to anythings that make egg and sperm. But the problem with that definition right off the bat is it doesn't apply to everything that has sex, because you don't need to have differentiated gametes to have sexual reproduction. You can have sexual reproduction with undifferentiated gametes. So you have sex, you have recombination, you have fertilization, you have a zygote, you have meiosis. These are all processes that occur in any sexual reproduction life cycle has all those processes in it. We don't need to define each one.
You're talking outside of human beings.
Yes, and that's important,
Stephen. Yeah, we have to talk about human beings here, right? Because we aren't. I know in your worldview we're animals, but in the real worldview we're not. We're distinct from the animals. We're designed in God's image, and so the conversation the starting point has to be human beings, and that's where you have to start your definitions from.
Yeah. So human beings, we typically make egg and sperm. We typically, most people will make some type of gamete. It'll either be a large non-motile gamete or it will be a small motile gamete. So if you want to have just the most basic answer to the question, what defines male and female in humans, we can start there with what gametes do you make, because that is a universal definition for things that have differentiated gametes. So that's a really easy place to start, and that's why I started there. But humans are really complicated, right? We're way more complicated than fungi, fungi are pretty complicated in their own sense, but reproductively, they're less complicated than we are. We're more complicated than, unicellular algae that could make differentiated gametes. So just starting from there, what about people who don't make gametes? What about a woman who is postmenopausal? She doesn't make gametes anymore. What about someone who's been injured? What about someone who's had I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's why we don't start there as a definition, because here's
so that doesn't, so the gametes don't work as a definition.
It can't work as the fundamental aspect of the definition. The reason why it can't work that way is because God did not define people by they make eggs or sperm. He defined them by male and female, right? So that's the fundamental baseline for it all.
When you asked me, my answer to that question was going to be what Anthony just said. I mean, if you ask me, how do we define sex? I would say, God created them male and female. And so the question then becomes, what defines male and female? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's not gametes.
It would not be gametes.
It's not gametes. Okay. So we could go a step up in complexity, right? We'd say, okay, what cells do you make? Well, let's go a little broader. Chromosomes, right? X and Y chromosomes. You have X chromosomes, you have Y chromosomes. And for most people, if you have two X chromosomes, you develop.
Can I ask? I'm sorry. I guess I do mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So are you, and I'm asking this because I want to understand to see, but you're talking about the chromosomes now and gametes and things like this. Are you under the belief that we wouldn't know what male and female was prior to the modern science and technology that we now have to be able to dig into cells and things like that?
The answer is that it depends on how you define male and female, right? So prior to modern, genetics technology, for example, if we're talking about chromosomes, there are other standards that you could use to make the assessment. But one modern standard that I hear from a lot of people is it's about chromosomes. So maybe we could use that as our standard now that we have the ability to use that, to make the determination of, what chromosomes does an individual have in their cells, right? We can now currently have the technology to make that characterization. So maybe we should use that as the standard. That's just one option in our toolkit here, right?
And do we work off of the majority or the minority? I mean, like if there's an exception, do we say that the exception defines things, or do we say the majority does?
Well, let's talk about it. Let's see what the typical situation and the exceptions are and see if we can evaluate, like, if this is a useful standard, if chromosomes are a useful standard, for example, right? So we've got XX typically female, XY, typically male. That's the typical characterization, right? Now, there's a whole lot of variation in that, including some variation that you wouldn't even know is there unless you actually looked at your chromosomes and actually sequenced your DNA. So we could say if you have a typical development pattern, typical gene expression pattern, everything kind of, within, one standard deviation of your typical human, you end up with, if you have two X chromosomes, that's going to be female. But you could have deletions to the X chromosomes that affect certain developmental pathways that lead to physiological or morphological differences that maybe the ovaries don't develop. Maybe oogenesis, which is the process of making egg cells, maybe that doesn't happen. That actually starts during embryonic development. Maybe it doesn't. You can have X and Y chromosomes, typically male, but you could have a deletion of a region on the Y chromosome. It's the MSY, male specific region Y. It basically, during embryonic development, it causes you to take a little detour and do the male development pattern instead of the female pattern, because the structures as they develop, the primary sexual characteristics, they're what's called developmentally homologous. That means they're the same tissue, and then they develop into different things depending on which pathway. So testes and ovaries are developmentally homologous, right? Do they start making oocytes? Do they develop seminiferous tubules? Where are they in the abdominal cavity? So you kind of have this branch point. The penis and the clitoris are developmentally homologous. It's the same tissue, and they do basically the same thing. It's erectile tissue for sexual stimulation. Those are the same thing, and sometimes you get an intermediate state based on the underlying genetics. So is just looking at the presence of an X or Y chromosome a useful tool to make a determination of male or female? I don't think it is.
So, okay. So let me ask you this question. I mean, and I know the answer. I'm doing this for everyone else. What causes that same tissue to develop either into the eggs, or I'm sorry, into the ovaries or the testes? What is it that causes the penis to develop or clitoris to develop?
Yeah, so it has to do with gene expression patterns regulating cell migration and cell development,
Right.
cell differentiation, and cell division at various stages of development. So if you have either a region that is upregulated or downregulated, or in some cases present or absent, you could have deletions. You could have situations where you have what's called translocations, where you have two X chromosomes, but the male specific region from the Y, for whatever reason, has translocated onto one of those X chromosomes. Now you end up with a situation where you're kind of doing both pathways. You're kind of pulling in two directions, right? And you end up, depending on the extent of the translocation and the characterization of the gene regulation, you're ending up maybe with something intermediate, or maybe that male specific region more or less gets shut down. If you were to survey genetically for those male specific genes, you would find them, right? But if you were to look hormonally or developmentally, you wouldn't see any evidence of it if it was completely inactivated. So that's my point here, talking about the chromosomes, is that we can characterize X and Y, but you end up with a lot of cases where that's going to mislead you.
Yeah. So, but the first point to make is that it's in a perfect world, it's the XX or XY that causes the genes to express the way they do, and therefore that tissue develops in what you call the male developmental pathway or the female developmental pathway, right?
So or something in between, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we do now have the knowledge that it's the genetics of XX or XY that causes it to occur. Now,
sort of.
well, I mean,
there's other stuff too.
No, those are the things that do it, and I mean everything else you're talking about is translocations. That is rare exceptions, and it's only when actual male genes from the Y is translocated to the X. So even in that situation, we are still talking about pathways that are all going to happen based on X or Y chromosomes, right?
No, that's the thing. It's not limited to X or Y chromosomes because there's so many factors that are downstream from that. So, for example, you have
downstream from XX,
downstream from X and Y chromosomes, or they're something else in the genome that is acted upon by something from either the X or the Y chromosome, the sex-specific regions, and those things could also affect sex determination. So for example, you could have completely typical sex chromosomes, right? But what if, so now all of us, the main sex hormones, just a little background for everybody, the two main sex hormones, it's testosterone and estrogen are the two main, there are others and it's complicated, but those are the two main ones if you want to characterize it broadly. And there's a typical range of each of those for your typical males, your typical females. And part of being responsive to those and developing a certain set of characteristics based on those hormones is having the appropriate receptors and having the appropriate mix of receptors. So there are conditions, for example, called androgen insensitivity, where it's a completely typical set of X and Y chromosomes. If you looked at the karyotype where you lay out the picture where you lay out all the chromosomes, completely normal. XY, 46 XY is like your typical male karyotype, right? But there might be a problem with the receptors for those testosterone hormones. So that person will basically be non-responsive to the male determining hormones. So now it's not the X chromosome and the Y chromosome that's doing it. It's somewhere else in the genome that is driving the determination of the development of primary and potentially secondary sex characteristics.
Yeah. Okay. So, and just to put this into plain English for everybody listening, you'll hear Andrew and I talk about the issue with Catholicism and how the terms of justification, sanctification that we see as separate terms in Christianity are often mixed together and blended. They blend together. Catholics do blend together justification, sanctification. What Dr. Dan is doing is we're blending a couple things together, and this is the issue I have. There's one issue.
True, I am.
Yeah, you are, and that's why I'm trying to make it.
Can I just say? Just one thing? Can I just say biology is multifactorial? Where you can never reduce anything in biology down to a single factor. So that's what that complexity is what I'm trying to highlight here.
Yeah, there's complexity, as you said, downstream. You're absolutely right about that. And then you also said, which you're also right about, that it all comes back to what would normally occur on X or Y chromosomes. And so the point I'm making is that first and foremost, we have males defined as XY. So in a perfect world, we go back to creation week. God created Adam and Eve and created them perfectly. They would have had a perfect XX for Eve, a perfect XY for Adam. There was no mistakes. There's no issues. And they're going to have children who are going to have near perfect genes because the fall happens sometime before the kids come on scene. But the point is that the XX and XY in a perfect world always lend themselves to male female, because then downstream, all that down regulation is still going to be influenced by the perfect XX and perfect XY. And so that person will develop male or female. Well, I mean, because
so can I give you a hypothetical to show you how that's not what happens?
Sure.
So you can have, as I described, you could have the situation of androgen insensitivity, where you have the either partial or lack of ability to respond to the male determining hormones, right? And they're collectively called androgens. That's the word for testosterones and related hormones.
Right. But that would be an abnormality. That wouldn't be.
I mean, we're talking about, there's the best data we have are that about 1.7% of the population is somewhere along the spectrum of intersex. But I'm actually not talking about that, because what you can have, and this is actually pretty common, because the Y chromosome doesn't frankly doesn't do a whole lot. It's the smallest chromosome by a very large margin, and you can get along pretty well without your Y chromosome. So if you have a very typical 46XY karyotype, you're just 46 chromosomes, nice pair of X and Y, no deletions, no weirdness, you can still have, for example, in androgen insensitivity, and that person will develop with female primary sex characteristics, by which I mean ovaries, uterus, vagina, clitoris. Like, they're going to have, if you looked at them, you would say, aha, that is a female.
I'm butting in just because I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that always is the case?
It depends on a lot of other factors, but it is, yes, for complete androgen insensitivity, if you have a Y chromosome, it's basically silent in terms of sex determination, yes.
Okay.
And I will say complete androgen insensitivity is relatively rare, but there's a lot of forms of partial, yeah.
You're talking people that have XXY.
No, it could be, well, that's a fairly common thing. Or it could be XY and insensitivity as well, because XO, where you have one single X chromosome, that's also a very common thing. So the XY with complete androgen insensitivity basically presents not exactly as the same as XO. And I always forget the names of these. There's Turner syndrome and Klinefelter syndrome for they're called aneuploidies of sex chromosomes, and you have different numbers of, I forget, I always confuse the names in my head. So I apologize. I'm just describing them rather than using the names. I always forget them.
That's okay, because I don't know the names.
So you can there are morphological traits, for example, for XO that you can sometimes morphologically diagnose it without looking at the chromosomes. Sometimes you can't. It's, again, there's a lot of variation in this stuff. So if I could just give me a second here, because I'm getting to the point that I was responding a second ago, was that you can have a situation with complete androgen insensitivity, or even largely androgen insensitivity. You're going to have an individual who reaches adulthood, and they're going to develop secondary female sex characteristics, right? Their hips will widen, they'll develop breasts, right? So you would look at that individual and naively think that's a female, right? But if you were to sequence their DNA and look into their genome, you would find 46XY. So, how are we making, again, the question is, how are we making this determination? Because it doesn't seem like, it seems like there's, again, it's multifactorial, and those factors are often in conflict with each other.
Yeah, the problem, though, is that all those factors, I mean, it seems like you've admitted this along the way. They're all mistakes, right? This wasn't part of the original grand design. And even in the examples you've used, where you've got certain genes not being expressed because the androgen insensitivity, they go towards the other sex, right? So you still are
not necessarily. They could be intermediate. And if I give you an example, you could have a situation where you have someone who has basically male morphology, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could find testes, you could find a penis, but the urethra doesn't go through the penis. The urethra is behind it. Or I guess posterior to it would be so like that's an intermediate state, right? That's not just going to the other one. It's
would that be a mistake, like a mutation and a bad mistake?
I wouldn't characterize it as a mistake. I mean, this is this range of variation is nearly 2% of the human population. That's 1 out of 50 people.
All right. So that gets to what I originally started with, right? This is the exception, not the rule. Right. So we don't define things by the exception, we define it by the rule.
So let's stick with that, right? So let's stick with that. If we were defining things by the general rule. Now, I'm only going to speak for myself. I don't generally going around sequencing people's DNA, taking blood samples to make karyotypes, nor looking at their genitals to confirm what's present, right? I don't typically do
You would get fired for doing that.
Yeah, that would be extremely illegal to do those things, right? So that's not how we're, right? So the rule is you look at people and you talk to them, and maybe they'll tell you, maybe they won't, right? But that's the rule in terms of how we do sex determination, right? It's kind of a simple heuristic of like, what mix of sex, primary and secondary sex characteristics can I directly perceive? And in a lot of ways, it's non-biological cues, right? It's clothing, for example, is going to inform your perception. So, right. So in the rule is that we're not checking these things. We're not assessing people's biology. Are we? Do you?
Well, you're bringing up something that's very interesting. So, for a long time, I used to listen to 4 different podcasts that were transgender podcasts. And it's very interesting. One of the things I perceived is, one of them was someone who's a biological man going through the transition to female. and explaining, like he was learning how to put on pantyhose and makeup and how to wear earrings. And it kind of was interesting that inherently, this person who's saying that gender is fluid knows there's only two genders, because he is trying to fit what is known as like how women dress, how women carry themselves. So it's kind of interesting that when you see people that say they're transitioning from one to the other, if it really is fluid, they could stay just as they are, because there would be no need to get your organs changed, to look different, to dress different, to act like the stereotypical other side. What's your cup say?
Oh, it says no whining. I turn it this way when I like have Zoom meetings with students, right? I can't, that would be mean.
Sorry, I got ADD. I love just, yeah. But you get my point. It's like, I think that even with what you're saying is, when you have someone who is saying they're transitioning from one gender to another, they don't stay as they are. They actually take on, often what we see, not always, but often, they over accentuate the other gender. So you'll have guys who transition to girls, and they have a much higher pitched voice than girls would have. And so it's like they know inherently that there's two genders. They say they don't, but they behave and act like what the other gender is. So when you're saying, well, we do it by dress, we do it by, voice. The men typically have, not always, but typically have deeper voices. So yeah, things like that. But those are ways we could assume. But you're right. The reality is, we know when someone is born and that they're male or female, right?
Do we?
Well,
let's see, because we can make this assessment, right? So someone is born, and they have you can see what, is there a penis and testes, or is there a vagina, right? You can see that when somebody is born. What if they have the MSY, that male specific region I talked about before? What if they have an MSY deletion? What if they have an MSY translocation? What if they have androgen insensitivity? And what if they have some kind of gene regulation difference? And these can be caused by something as simple as regulatory variation. There's a wide range of regulatory patterns in the human genome.
Yeah. So
and if I may just finish the thought before, these things can change. So you can have someone that may be born as you say, I'm going to put in quotes, as a female, right? But then over the course of their life, as they enter puberty, their hormonal environment is going to change based on some previously unexpressed genetic material that then starts being expressed. And now maybe they start developing secondary male sexual characteristics, right? Body and facial hair, deeper voice. Like, what about in that situation? Because we made a determination, but to the extent that you can say a determination is right or wrong, that determination, according to this simple binary, would have been wrong.
Okay, so is that the rule or the exception?
It's part of normal human genetic and morphological and every other kind of variation. It's typical for humans.
It happens enough, we call it normal.
About 2% of the time is somewhere along this intersex. And I do want to point out just to the audience, we're doing a little bit of conflating trans and intersex, which are two separate things. But I just want to make sure everyone's clear that there's a distinction there.
So we would disagree there's a distinction between gender and sex.
So I don't disagree that there is a distinction between gender and sex. I think sex as a binary is a mischaracterization of biology, is what I would say.
And what about gender?
Gender is much more, and I'm going to say this as a comparison, but I want to make clear for everybody that I'm not saying this as an absolute to exclude these factors from sex, because there are, I'll say it this way, there are social factors for sex determination, like just straight up, there are, like, it's what it is. But gender is more socially constructed and socially determined than sex is. But there are social factors for both of them, and societal factors and whatnot. And you agree with that, I think. I think that is actually something that if you think about it, you agree with that. Because as we were talking before, you could see somebody who morphologically, right, physically, and also based on the way they talk and the way they dress, presents as female, and you would not know that you disagreed with that characterization unless you dove into their biology in an extremely invasive way.
Yeah, but the thing is that if they're born a female and they know that, there's an exception, as Anthony was saying, mistakes. There's part of the curse that happened when Adam and Eve violated the law.
Is red hair part of the curse? Because
I think so, completely.
Because the fraction of the population with red hair is approximately equal to the fraction of the population that is somewhere on this intersex continuum.
Well, I think having bald heads is part of the curse.
I think anybody who's not Italian is part of the curse. I don't know about you guys.
I knew that was coming.
Okay, I had to put this up. This is hysterical. Allman Brothers. I was born a Ramblin' Dan. Sorry, could not resist.
It's better than most puns I get on YouTube, so I'll take.
Yeah, that's a funny one.
No, I'll give it to you.
So I would say that sex and gender are the exact same thing. Having said that, are there some males that are more manly and some a little less manly? Maybe environmental factors, maybe how they're raised.
Well, I mean, that's clear,
right? And females, the same thing.
Italians are much less manly than everyone else, especially Jewish people.
Yeah,
we all agree with that.
Right.
This is actually a really instructive example here, because we agree on a lot of this in terms of things like sex and gender being socially determined, because you can see this across different societies, across human history, where what traits define, a manly man evolve over time. They are not consistent through space and time. So to the extent that we're defining manliness, right, if you saw somebody in a particular society in a specific time and place throughout the history of human existence and all its diversity, right, you're going to make a different determination about that person's sex and gender role in society based on that context. And by asking about manliness, right, and what traits define manliness, that's a great illustration of that reality, that these things are fundamentally socially constructed to some extent, which means we cannot reduce them strictly to this or that biological factor, or even necessarily some combination of biological factors.
So, of course, Andrew and I are joking about some of this stuff about men.
No, I know, but it's a good illustration.
But yeah, I would say that while some of those things, you're right, maybe time periods and cultural issues can change that slightly. What doesn't change is how God defines males and females and the characteristics that males and females have. And so God does actually define a subset of those.
So can I ask then? So given so we've gone through a bunch of biological and social criteria, right? We've gone through a bunch of criteria and basically found them wanting in terms of being able to make a nice, neat binary distinction here. What about those criteria? You encounter some stranger. You're walking on the sidewalk. You encounter a stranger. You know nothing about this person other than what you see. And maybe you exchange a few words. Hi, how are you? Wow, been raining a lot lately. Right? You in your head, you make a determination in terms of what you think their sex and gender are in that moment. What are the criteria that God provides that allow you to do that?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's 99.9% of people, their body, the physical structure, you can tell whether they're male or female. So right off the bat, you can see that in nearly everybody. Whether it's the Adam's apple or the broad shoulders, or, there are lots of great characteristics that we can look at from that perspective. From God's perspective, women are the weaker vessel. And we don't have time to get into what all that means, but that can be seen easily. It not only physically, but it can be seen emotionally. When you talk to somebody long enough and see how they are, how they act, how they respond to life,
I'm sorry, can I just clarify there? Women are the weaker vessel physically and emotionally?
Yeah. Like I said, it'll take a little while to explain all that. Physically, in general, females are weaker. I think I would hope you would agree with that as a biologist.
I would say physically.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So now emotionally,
in some ways, I doubt any of the three of us here could push something the size of a grapefruit through an orifice in our body. So in some ways, I would say they're a whole lot stronger than us, wouldn't you?
Well, I would say that they tolerate pain better because God designed them to do that. Because they're women and they give babies, unlike men who don't give babies. So
yeah.
I mean,
I think being able to tolerate pain is a mark of strength, personally.
Well, yeah. So now you get into
physical strength, and mental.
Yeah,
and I think that going down, I think that's going to take too much time to explain some of these things.
Yeah,
go down this road, but one of the things. Let me ask you, Dan, this question is: you're basing it. You're asking a question of, okay, you see someone on the street. I wouldn't be able to tell if they're Italian or Jewish. Does that mean that they're not?
No, not necessarily. And actually, that's my point. Italian and Jewish and things like nationalities and races, these are socially constructed categories. That's exactly my point. You can't tell by looking at somebody if they're in this or that category, just like you shouldn't assume 100% just by looking at somebody, whether they're in this or that sex or gender category as well. That's exactly my point. Thank you.
But the point is that it doesn't change the fact that someone is one of those things. They're either male or female. Because one of the things that I would say is the fact that, we've been putting female hormones into milk that could affect the way men behave, right? That's going to affect.
So probably not, because that's the recombinant bovine growth hormone. So hormones are extremely species specific. We don't have the receptors for that. So that probably shouldn't be doing anything.
Probably shouldn't be.
Probably shouldn't be. We don't have the receptors for it. You can test like bovine growth hormone against human growth hormone receptors, and they're not compatible.
Yeah, that's not an issue, but there are numerous medications and GMO products that do mimic estrogens and are problematic for humans. So we do see that stuff out there, not from bovine, but it is from medications.
Sort of medication, sure, yeah, that's a different thing though, because that's not in the food supply, right? That's medication. That's a different story.
Yeah, but somebody brought this up, and I'm going to see if I can find it here real quick.
And I'm going to be right back while you bring that up.
Yeah.
And actually, can I just say it's 11:40 for me? I don't know what time zone y'all are in, so it's getting late on my end. So
Eastern, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we should maybe think about wrapping this up.
Dan, you're not too far from me. I mean, I used to be in Jersey.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You used to be. Yeah.
I actually used to do open air evangelism at Rutgers University. So I know right where it's at.
Yeah. The one point I want to bring up, Reason to Doubt says this, and they think they have a gotcha statement. If you accept that there are exceptions and you can see the entire argument, that's not true. Andrew and I did not accept that there are exceptions. We accepted the fact that there are mutations. There are things that went wrong within the genome, not that these are normal variations. And so when you have a male that has issues with his body parts not working right, that's an abnormality. The same way that somebody born without two arms is an abnormality. The same way that somebody who's born with trisomy 18 or trisomy 21, better known as being mentally retarded, that is a problem in the genetics. That's not a normal thing. So we don't use those things to define what a normal human being is if you're born with trisomy 18. The same way we don't define what a male and female is by something that is obviously wrong with one of those pathways that you talked about.
So the problem with that formulation of it is you're taking something that is part of the very much. So I like the word typical because it's a statistical descriptor, whereas normal and words like normal and wrong assign a value judgment onto things. Whereas typical is just a statistical description, right, of variation within a population. So by saying that individuals who have intersex conditions, right, by saying that that's a mutation, that's it's damage, it's wrong, it's not normal. What we're saying is that those individuals, by virtue of something that is not under their control, they are somehow worth less than other people. And I fundamentally reject that, in the same way that I wouldn't call, I don't like the term retarded. I don't think anybody should use that term to refer to anybody with trisomy 21 or any one of a number of developmental conditions. Because again, when we use terms like that and like normal or, whatever, wrong, right, we're assigning a value judgment onto these conditions that are a completely typical part of human variation. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should accept that this is within the range. These are things that occur in humans. And it's not unique to humans, because a while back, you said that animals don't have this problem, right, of figuring out like this, wow, sex determination is complicated. Animals do. They just don't have societies that are as complicated as ours. But you have intersex animals. You have animals like,
because
being
that way.
Being transgender is part of like the typical life cycle for many species of animals. Like that is a thing that they do.
No, God designed certain species to do that. He did not design humans to do that. I mean, that's the difference.
And yet 1 out of 50 people approximately fall into that range somehow. That's normal. That is a normal facet of human existence, and it has been forever.
No, I get it. And 100% of people are sinners on this planet and are going to face God, right? So that's a much higher statistic than 1 to 2% of the population being sinners in the sin of transgenderism and or homosexuality. So I don't.
Now again, you're conflating a couple unrelated issues there, but
not at all. I mean, because we would take the position homosexuality and transgenderism is sin, not a normal variation for humans, which is the position that you're taking. So like, if you had a child, right? I mean, look, if I had a child who had trisomy 18, it's still a human being. That's still my child, still male or female. I would still love that child, but I would also recognize that child, this isn't the way it was meant to be according to God's original perfect creation. Like there's a problem here. So this is not a normal variation to have trisomy 18. The same way it's not a normal variation to be male and have problems with your parts or the opposite.
I mean, again, the term normal has value associated with it, so I really like the term typical. And if we look at things like having XO for the sex chromosomes, or XXY, or XYY, or XXX, and you could even have more than that. It could be 4, it could be 5.
I agree.
Those variants are present somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population. They're extremely
less than 1%.
common.
I've done the research on that.
No, it's not. It's extremely common. It's when you put all the sex chromosome aneuploidies together, some of which, I mean, either of you gentlemen might be XYY, you would never know it. Or one of you might be XX with an MSY translocation. You might never know it.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that unless you're doing, as I said before, extremely invasive checking of people's biology across a number of dimensions, you're never going to know what variation is beneath the surface of presentation. And to that extent, everything we're talking about here has a social dimension to it. And it doesn't have to be one pole or the other pole. There's lots of people who reject that binary, and morphologically, behaviorally, socially, whatever, exists somewhere in between. That's about 1.7% of the population.
Yeah, 1.7.
And that's a very wide range of presentations there.
Yeah. So I use the word normal because God does define what is right and wrong. God does define what is male and female. And so we can use the word normal in our worldview because it would be based off of God's standards and not what humans have come up with. So I mean, having said all that, I thank you for your time, Dan. I know
that's happy to.
I know that it's a lot later than you ever intended.
No, it's fine. This is a really fun conversation. I really appreciate you giving me the time, Andrew. I hope I satisfied your desire to talk through some of this stuff.
No, because I want you back on. I want to discuss more. Actually, you know what? You're not that far. Maybe I'll come up to Rutgers. We go out, grab a bite to eat.
Honestly, that would be really fun.
Yeah. I think it would.
You guys can't be an hour and a half apart.
From where I am now, probably about that. Yeah.
I'd have to, we'll see. We'll talk offline.
Yeah. So, so stick around. Don't leave afterwards, and
I'll stay in the studio.
Yeah. So, but I do appreciate. I gave you a hard time for not coming in, and
man, you blocked me on Twitter for asking where you get your news. Come on, man, unblock me.
I could do that. Yeah. No, I just it was I just after I started getting people that just keep going. Yeah, it wasn't for that. It was just.
I got 2 very young kids, so if you think I will not get the last word, I have 2 small children.
That's funny. I do a thing with people that when online, and I'll tell people, I'm like, look, when people and I'm not saying that you're being prideful. I'm just saying, with saying the last word, I'll say to people, like, once they display like an arrogance, because one of the things with arrogance, like, you got to get the last word. Like, so I'll tell people, I'm like, look, I'm not going to read whatever you type. Like, you could type whatever, I won't read it. But the fact that you type it is the proof that what I'm saying, I'm saying you're arrogant.
This is a whole other discussion, though, because that actually gets at the whole point of this conversation more broadly, the evolution creationism stuff, us going back and forth on Twitter. You actually just illustrated the whole point, because I'm under no illusions that I'm going to convince either of you of anything. I'm not going to convince you of any of the stuff I'm saying. That's not going to happen. But there are people watching.
The reason is because
that's who my target audience is. There are people reading, and that's the target audience.
Yeah, and my wife asks me all the time, like, why do you go back and forth? It's because it's usually for the others who are watching and reading.
Yeah, that's what it's for. It's for the viewers. Yeah,
it's no different than when I do open air evangelism and I get some heckler and she are heckling me. Everyone else,
we have something in common. We have something. Our target audiences. We have something in common.
We have tons of things in common. Yeah. We both know what a male and a female is.
Probably our chromosomes, our karyotypes look similar, but we wouldn't know because neither of us have checked. So we can't know for sure.
So I would like to have you come in. I think it would be to have more discussion. I know that there's been another, Dr. Duff and Standing for Truth. I forget who else. Redefined Living. There are a couple others. If you guys want to come in, I mean, this is the thing. We usually have a guest with a topic, but we open it up to anything. That's what we try to do. And
yeah, I know we got way off the rails tonight, but that's fun. But look, my schedule. We could talk about this offline, but my schedule is I work late Thursdays during semesters, so it's tough to try to catch you.
Yeah, no, I get that, and we can always, but the thing is that I'm just opening up that folks, if you want to come in. I mean, we have a number of people watching on YouTube and Facebook, and I can actually see on Wisdom, we have 108 people listening to us on the Wisdom app. Anyone's allowed to come in and ask any questions. We're not, I mean, if tonight would be a perfect example of saying we're not afraid of questions. We're not afraid of, and if we don't know things, we say we don't know things. I got no problem saying that. I do it all the time, but I want to be able to reason through things and understand things. And one of the things, and this is what I appreciate with you, I appreciate it with Erica and Jordan, who came in, is at least what I'm seeing with the 3 that I just mentioned is trying to understand another person's perspective, trying to not misrepresent someone. That's more the issue where you start doing that, you're probably not going to be welcomed back in. Mm-hmm. It's, and that's the thing. And that's where it becomes a thing where we're going to disagree on things. But here, and I want you to understand our perspective, Dan. Mm-hmm. You and I currently disagree. We won't always disagree. Immediately upon death, you will completely agree with us. But before that point is what I'm concerned about. And so I want to be able to, though you would disagree with what I'm going to say, it's important for me to make sure that you understand where we would spend eternity. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I know You may disagree with it, but every single one of us, myself, you may be a more moral person than me, Dan. I'll grant that. But it's not our morality that gets us right with God. You and I are both criminals in God's sight, right? We've broken his law, lied, stolen, things like that. Haven't put him first and foremost. And even if you're better than me, right? I mean, that's like saying, well, I can swim to England and I can get about a mile before I drown, but you can get 2 miles before you drowned. Neither of us made it, right? Because we can't do it. And so the point being is we can't on our own get right with God. Okay. We're not going to do it by trying to work our way there. We would deserve, both of us deserve eternity in the lake of fire because God is infinitely holy. Does it concern you?
It's going to be a long eternity then. What can I tell you? It's going to be a long eternity.
Eternity is a long time to be wrong.
Yeah, I don't buy Pascal's wager. I'm sorry.
I'm not giving Pascal's wager.
Pascal's
like
wager.
Yeah.
I don't buy the math. It's just, sorry.
The point being is, does it concern you that if you were to die tonight, that you'd be judged by God and spend eternity in a lake of fire? It's not Pascal's wager, because Pascal's wager is giving the different, for people that don't know Pascal's wager, it's like basically, hey, might as well try Jesus because it's better than the alternative.
Those are not, yeah.
But I'm not giving that. I'm saying this is what we deserve.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is no. I don't worry about that because I don't believe that that's a thing. So, like, you are welcome to believe it, be my guest, but like, I don't. So, like, appealing to that is not going to be persuasive to me. That just is how it is.
And again, as I said earlier, I think you were here when I said it to Erica, I think, or maybe it was Jordan. I think.
It was a similar thing to Erica, and I said in the chat, my answer is like, no, it's not. I don't believe that is a possibility. So
would you, if I gave you a revolver, one bullet in the chamber, spun it, Russian roulette, would you play Russian roulette?
Why would I do that? Of course I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because like being alive is cool. Like, why would I do that? That's dumb.
You wouldn't risk your physical life?
No. Why would I do that?
Why would you risk your spiritual life? Because your physical life is only 70 some 80, 90 years.
And that's why I'm not going to risk it.
Spiritual life is forever.
I see there's a faulty premise in your argument, and it's that I accept the idea of a spiritual life, right? So this is only going to be convincing to someone who accepts that is at least a possibility, and I don't.
Well, so like, it doesn't matter whether we accept it or not. It matters whether it's true.
Right. And the answer in my mind is no. So like, okay, we're back to square one. Like, I have to believe that is the case in order for it to be persuasive.
Okay. So, but you are playing Russian roulette with your soul.
Playing imaginary Russian roulette, sure, but like the thing is, do you see what I'm saying though? Like, why this is not like a serious conversation? We're hypothesizing, what about this situation? What about that situation? Like, all right, and what if a unicorn landed on my roof? What if $1 million appeared on my desk sitting next to me? These are things that I don't believe are possible.
Well, the thing is it doesn't matter whether we believe it or not. If I don't believe in gravity, doesn't mean I float.
It doesn't matter. Sure, fine, okay. Gravity exists in the universe. I can measure gravity.
Yeah, and you can measure the effects of God in the universe by the immaterial part of you.
If you say so.
Do you have an ability to reason?
That Nobel Prize.
Do you have an ability to reason?
Now we're going to do this again. Reasoning is an emergent property of brains. Like, I've done this already. Like, I've done this like so many times in my life. I can't count it. Reasoning and stuff, it's an emergent property of brains, yada, yada, yada. You could reduce it to neurotransmitters and chemicals, the arrangement of neurons. Like, it's late. And if this is what we're going to do, we should do a separate conversation.
Well, okay. Let me ask this one then. I'll turn it this way. What about the laws of logic? Are those immaterial or material?
Again, those are so... There's a difference between tangible and immaterial, right? So like, there's a distinction to be had here between things that exist in a logical but non-material sense, and then like things that have to exist in some tangible way in order for what you're saying to be accurate. And again, I've had this conversation more times than I can remember in my life, to the point where like literally I'm bored with it. So I actually said this on Twitter because somebody asked on Twitter a few weeks ago. They said like, you've never mentioned this on your channel at all. Are you an atheist? And I said, yes, I'm the most indifferent atheist you will ever meet. I've thought about it a lot. That's where I've landed. And if you say, but why are you an atheist? The answer you're going to get is because I've thought about it a lot and beyond, and that's where I've landed. And beyond that, you're going to get, that's where I am. Like, that's it. Like, okay. It's just these arguments about the rules of logic and the immaterial mind and things like reasoning and memory, like, they're just not persuasive to me.
Okay. So,
and I apologize for that, but
before there were human minds, right? There was a time before a human mind, correct? You would say millions.
Was there a time before human minds? Yes, because Homo sapiens have not always existed. Okay. Yes.
So could the universe have existed and not existed in the same way at the same time?
In the same way at the same time? Now we're getting into like quantum physics, and that's not my field. So I'm going to leave that to the cosmologist to answer that question.
No, it's
not my field. It's an empirical question, but it's not my field, so I don't take a position on it.
Well, it's the second law of logic. Okay, the law of non-contradiction, that you can't have A and not A in the same way at the same time. And so if you say that we can't have the universe and not have the universe in the same way at the same time, that's what the law of logic would say, then it's not a product of the human brain.
All right. Is that the product of a human brain? Or does that law exist independent of human brain?
Well, I don't know. I would say
I'm not a philosophy person. I don't know.
It exists in the mind of God.
I don't care.
It's because it's consistent with the nature of God.
Faulty premise. I don't accept your premise. See, that's an unsupported premise. And that's where this argument always goes, which is why I always bring it back to things like evolutionary biology and that kind of thing. Because you say, eventually you drill down enough and you say, what's the evidence for this? And you go, well, there are things in the world that can't be explained by natural forces. What is it? Irreducible complexity in biological systems. Okay. Now we're talking my language, right?
Let's stick with biology. So someone who's born, if we're just material things, and we'll end with this, we're just material things. You have
almost out of tea. I gotta go because I have one sip left.
Yeah, you have a biological male. They're a biological male.
Oh, I hate that phrase so much. It's so shallow. It doesn't capture anything. But sure.
Will they behave as a male? Because they're the chemistry, right?
Behave as a male is
do everything that's man.
But that's not like a set in stone thing. Behave as a male, where and when? See, right now, where I'm sitting?
Well, the question I'm going to ask is, how can they
years ago?
How could they identify? How could they identify as a female if they're biologically a male? If they're all their cells are saying they're male, how do they identify as a female apart from an immaterial part of them?
I don't know why, if they're identifying if somebody identifies as a thing that is like necessarily a material thing. Like, I think, sex characterization is a material characteristic of somebody. That's not a material thing.
If all the counterparts are male, how do they identify in opposition to their biology?
So I dispute the term opposition to biology, because biology, it's a continuum. It's not two boxes, right? So you can't be in opposition to a continuum. You can just fall somewhere along that continuum, as we talked about earlier. So this is really fun, but I feel like we're going around in circles, and it is midnight, and I do need to get up in 6 hours. Right. So I do think that,
No, I appreciate it. And so with that, folks, it's been one of the longer shows for those who like Anthony time that goes over. You got 2 hours of Anthony time. So,
well, Andrew, let's stick around for 2 minutes, and then we'll let
I'll leave. Have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night, Dr. N. Thanks for coming on.
So that was the long-awaited conversation on sex determination on the Apologetics live show. I hope you enjoyed. If you've lasted this long, please give this video a like, subscribe to this channel if you aren't already a subscriber, and as always, don't get fooled. Thank you.